So that kind of gets us a little bit into why this topic is important. There are a lot of different large enterprises. They start really well. They spin up a team, things are going good. Then they say, oh, okay, well, let's just do this throughout the whole company. And then for some reason, it doesn't always seem to work. I mean, it seemed like you should be able to go from 4 teams, do the same thing, and now you have 200 teams. But for some reason, it doesn't happen that way. All right, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There's some things that you have to consider. So just to level set, there's some assumptions that I want to get out and make sure that we're all on the same page. So when we say agile, what we're talking about is the need to respond to change. We're talking about a set of values that supports a set of principles that undergird practices throughout agile. Now, agile is not necessarily just one thing. It's more of a mindset. That mindset includes several different frameworks. Those frameworks may be Scrum, which a lot of people are really familiar with. It could be XP, it could be Lean, TDD, FDD, Crystal, DSDN. There are a whole host of different frameworks out there and different approaches for Agile. And hopefully for many of you, that's not new. So when we say transformation, what we're saying is you could have a spectacular perspective on doing something. You could know where you want to go and not necessarily how you want to get there, but you know the outcome that you want. And so when we're talking about transformation, we're saying going from doing things one way to doing it another way to reach a certain outcome. So even though you go from horse and buggy to a car, you're still getting from point A to point B. Even if you take a helicopter, you're still getting from point A to point B. But what we're not talking about is combining things that don't really make a lot of sense to combine. So we've heard of things like Fragile and Scrumfall and all these other things. And it's not that you can't combine things. You can combine things, but you have to keep in mind what your business outcome is. Because just because you change things doesn't mean that you've actually increased value at all. And so when we're talking about scale, what we mean is you can have a very high-performing team. I went too fast. You have a very high-performing team that's one superhero of a team. But when you scale, you're trying to have a slew of superheroes. You're trying to have several high-performance teams, not just one. All right, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean when we say agile, what we mean when we say transformation, and what we mean when we say scale. All right, so there's a guy by the name of Matthias Willems. Anyone familiar with this guy? All right, he's a guy from Belgium who has set the world record, the Guinness Book record for growing the largest pumpkin. 2,624.6 pounds. I mean, that's impressive. That's like really impressive. They had to use a forklift to bring this thing in. It's super impressive. All right. What ends up happening in a lot of companies? This is what they do. They grow a super impressive pumpkin. They have a high-performing team that has a great output, very spectacular, very impressive. The problem is, how many of these can you grow? Can you scale this? Can you scale a nearly 3,000-pound pumpkin? And if you scale it, can you move it? Can you do anything with it? And for folks that are into gardening and growing and so forth, like, this guy's like a rock star. I mean, he is phenomenal. Now, the person who he beat out that had previously set the world record for growing a pumpkin, these are some of the things that he did to grow the pumpkin. And you can Google it, or look it up and see it for yourself. All right, so one of the things he did every night, according to this guy, every night, he would go outside and put a blanket over the pumpkin. Apparently it worked. He talked to the pumpkin. He gave the pumpkin a lot of care. All right? What's that?
It must have come from the most sincere pumpkin.
The most sincere, I don't know. You have to ask Charlie Brown about that. But we'll see. But think about in organizations when they have a proof of concept for Agile. And that's what they do. They set it out, they put a blanket over it. Are you guys okay? Is the team good? You're fine? Okay. Does the team need anything? Are you good? Okay, great. Want us to bring in lunch? Everything's fine. It's really, they give it a lot of attention. Problem is, as soon as they spin up other teams, it's like, treat them like they're just team number 25. They don't treat them like this, because that's hard to do for that. Now, again, this guy's famous in that world. This guy, on the other hand, no one knows who this guy is. He's just some guy that farms and produces a lot of pumpkins. However, his industry, his business is at $100 million a year. Farmers, they don't get that same level of attention, and you can't give quite that same level of attention as the previous guy with the previous pumpkin. So when you start becoming an agile farmer, there's certain things that you have to change, and we'll talk about some of those things that you have to change that you just can't do when you have an agile garden or you're an agile gardener. So let's think about what's the purpose in a garden? Anyone?
Providing food.
Providing food. Okay, providing food for who? For whomever consumes it.
Yourself.
Yourself.
Growing things.
Growing things.
Planting seeds.
Planting seeds.
Providing income.
Having fresh supply. Someone said something.
They provide income.
To
Organic.
provide income for a garden.
In a garden. No.
Okay.
That would be for a garden, maybe, or some other preposition. My bad.
Removing like critters and pests.
Okay.
Relaxation or a hobby.
Relaxation or a hobby. Okay.
Personal benefit.
Personal benefit. All right. So I'm going to stay with those last two, because that's where I lean towards seeing a garden. A garden is usually really for personal benefit. It's for relaxation. It is to provide food, but the food is usually is provided to a small group. It's not intended for commerce per se. It's inward. It's like personal use. So when we think about the purpose in a farm, what's the purpose in a farm?
Feed the masses.
Feed the masses, mass production,
Business.
Great income.
great income,
Business.
business. All right, and that is a big shift in the thinking. Because when you're creating a garden, you're thinking about how nice this would be for us. How great this is for us. How much do we like this? When you're thinking about a farm, you're thinking about how much will my customers enjoy what I am producing? It's a big mind shift from gardening to farming. So we'll take a look at, and just quickly talk about 2 examples. Spotify. A lot of people are familiar with the Spotify model. If you research a little further, what you'll find out is that Spotify started out using Scrum. When they decided to scale, they quickly began to realize this isn't scaling quite the way we want it to based off of how they were doing it. Can you scale Scrum? Absolutely, but at that time, they were not sure how. So to start scaling, they changed from a Scrum Master to an Agile coach. They changed from Scrum team to a squad. They changed from program level, sort of, to tribes. The main thing that I want to point out here is that they changed how they looked at it, and they had to. Oftentimes, we have Scrum teams that do really well, and we want to hold on to that so much that we're actually going anti-agile at that point, because we're not allowing ourselves to grow. We're not allowing the teams to begin to transform, which is actually one of the reasons that I like transformation so much, because it's pretty methodology agnostic. You kind of do what works. And not only do you do what works, but you figure out what works within that particular plan. Because what works in one does not necessarily work in another. There's certain rules that apply across the board, but in general, you have to modify the approach. The Lego company, similar to Spotify, they started out using Scrum. They wanted to start scaling. They quickly realized the way that we're doing it now is great, but we're having a hard time, and they became very frustrated with scaling. So they actually chose to go with SAFe.